this standing up for Palestine, ending the occupation, really understanding what's happening in Palestine has been a 20-year fight for me internally. I have, so it's not new. It's not a new phenomenon. It's not something new for Southeast Asians to be in alignment with. As a Hmong refugee, as Hmong people are oppressed throughout the world, as indigenous, Asians, this is something really close and dear to my heart as we fled from China to Southeast Asia, now to the US. Unless Palestinians are free, I feel like Hmong people will never be free. And so my life is really intertwined with the freedom of Palestinians, and as it is with all indigenous people throughout the world. As from a gender justice lens, if the population, they say the population in Palestine is 50% under 18, that means 50% of the population that's being bombed right now are children. How are they to protect themselves? And then if you know anything about war, you know that the majority of the men in that country is probably that country, because of the 75 years of war and 75 years of occupation, the population is probably elderly and women and children. And so with all wars, men make the rules, they make the policies, and women and children suffer. And so I think that from that gender justice lens, we need to take a look at who's dying in Palestine. Through, in the last 25 years of my work doing domestic violence and sexual assault and gender-based violence work, we have to be very clear about who the victims are. When do we start victim blaming? If in fact people want us to see both sides, in domestic violence and sexual assault, we know that there's one side. Genocide of a population, there is a victim here. It's not both sides are in conflict. It's not that they're at war. One side is surviving genocide, apartheid. I think from a gender justice lens, it's like you don't say the perpetrator who's been beating the wife for the last 50 years of their life, and all of a sudden she fights back, and you're like, you need to see both sides. No, one has been trying to survive for the last 50 years. There is no two sides here. In a power dynamic of power and control, power and abuse, who the victims are and who the perpetrators are. When the French were taxing the Hmong people in the hills of Southeast Asia, and they were taxing us without representation, Hmong people burnt down French headquarters. Like, it's not resistance, and armed resistance is not something new to Hmong people. And so that's why I come from this place of you deem yourself as heroes. Like my dad and them, for fighting back, are deemed as heroes to this day. And so you can't all of a sudden be like, those people fought for their survival and they're heroes, but these people here are terrorists, And so that's really where my consciousness of tying this to not demonizing how people in resistance and people who are trying to survive.
It took me a long time to be to even say I'm a survivor of genocide. I was born at the end of the Khmer Rouge genocide, and people stayed silent for a very long time. We survived all of that, not to stay silent when we see a genocide happening in our lifetime. And so my hope is for my people is that they don't forget what happened. We have been reframing the message around the war in Southeast Asia. It is not the Vietnam War. It was a war in Southeast Asia. And this is the American war in Palestine.
I think it's so vitally important that we know that the people who actually suffer at the end of all of this is the women and queer folks and the children, right? When men are into places where they're just about trying to figure out policies and trying to figure out who is the hero here and who is not the hero here and who becomes the victim. And all of that gets to be determined by those who are in positions of power, and the narratives and the stories that get interpreted, and who is doing that interpretation. And so often most of the time that it is, a majority of the time that it is men who are doing that. And you can clearly see that is often always played out in wars.
I hope we choose the right side to be on the right side of history. I hope we say ceasefire in Palestine, And I also know that this is the American war, just like it was the American war in Southeast Asia. This is the American war in Palestine.